Today, we're going to dive into the hidden architecture of our own thoughts, these invisible forces that shape our debates, our policies, and honestly, our whole reality. And it all kicks off with a simple choice between two little phrases. Okay, what's the real difference between daycare and early education? I mean, on the surface, they seem to describe the exact same thing, right? It's a place kids go when their parents have to work. But, and this is a big but, the choice between these two phrases has absolutely enormous consequences. It's the difference between seeing something as a private hassle versus a public priority. So let's break this down. When you hear daycare, what comes to mind? For most people, it suggests a basic service, something focused on just keeping kids safe, almost like child storage. But when you hear early education, whoa, that's a different story. That frames it as an investment in a child's development, a public good that actually benefits all of us. One is a personal problem to be solved. The other is a collective opportunity. So how can a simple choice of words have that much power? To really get it, we need to pull back the curtain on this core concept of a frame. This is that secret architecture I was talking about, the mental structures that organize literally everything we think and believe. Think of a frame like a pair of glasses you don't even know you're wearing. It brings certain details into sharp focus while making other things, well, basically invisible. And here's the truly mind-bending part. When new facts come along that totally clash with our frames, we don't change the frame. Nope, we just reject the facts. That is how powerful and sticky these things are. So let's bring this back to our first question. What's the main frame the media uses when they talk about childcare? Because, that frame is probably the one most of us are using, whether we realize it or not. Overwhelmingly, the media frames childcare as a private issue. We usually only hear about it when there's a tragic safety failure, those awful killer nanny stories, or maybe as a side note in a story about welfare reform. And the underlying message is always crystal clear. It's up to individual parents to figure this out by choosing wisely, as if finding great, affordable care is as simple as picking the right brand of cereal at the grocery store. And here's the big consequence. As communications expert Susan Bales puts it, the current frames reinforce personal, not collective, responsibility. And when an issue is seen as a personal problem, it never, ever becomes a public priority. The whole conversation just dies on the vine before it can even start. So, if frames are the architecture, then what's the engine that actually powers them? This, right here, is the big aha moment. It turns out our minds are running on something we were all taught in English class was just for poetry, and that's metaphors. Now, we're not just talking about flowery language here. Cognitive linguists like George Lakoff have shown that these conceptual metaphors are the absolute bedrock of how we reason. Our brains are constantly and unconsciously mapping one idea onto another to make sense of the world. In fact, these metaphors are the very building blocks of the frames we were just talking about. Let me show you a classic example that might just blow your mind. We understand the abstract idea of an argument by using the physical concept of war. You might be thinking, no, I don't, but just listen to the words we all use. Your claims are indefensible. He attacked every weak point I had. I totally shot down his arguments. See? We don't just use these phrases for a little extra flavor. We actually live by this metaphor. We see the person we're arguing with as an opponent, and the whole point is to win. The metaphor literally creates that reality for us. Here's another one we use all the time without even noticing. Ideas are objects. We say things like, I can't quite grasp that idea, or here, let me give you an idea. We treat them like physical things you can hold, pass around, and own. And, if ideas are objects, then it just makes sense that the mind is a container we put them in. We say things like, I've got a lot on my mind today, or my mind is totally empty. These metaphors are so deep in our thinking, they just feel like literal truth. They're the invisible engine powering everything. Okay, so this is all really interesting, but so what? What does this mean for anyone who actually wants to change things? Well, it means you can't just throw more facts at people and expect them to change their minds. You have to change the frame. And to do that, you need to introduce new, better metaphors. So how do you actually do that? It's basically a three-step process. First, you never, ever repeat the old, unhelpful frame. That just reinforces it. Instead, you introduce a powerful new metaphor that reframes the whole issue. And then you bridge every question and every conversation back to your new way of thinking. Let's see how this could work for early education. So instead of using a term like daycare, What if we used a metaphor that really highlights essential development? For example, what about the nutrition metaphor? Just feel how that shifts the whole conversation. Is nutrition a private luxury? Of course not. It's a basic necessity. This metaphor makes early education feel essential, like something that prevents mental starvation. It's no longer just a service. It's a critical ingredient for healthy growth. Or let's look at another really potent option, the cultivation metaphor. This one really highlights the importance of the environment. Seedlings need the right soil, the right amount of light, and constant care. It emphasizes that real development requires active, hands-on tending to give kids the conditions they need to flourish. It moves the focus away from just safety and toward long-term, proactive growth. And this idea of framing, it's not just about childcare, not by a long shot. It applies to almost every single major issue we talk about as a society, and you can see it most clearly in how the news is presented to us every single day. Media scholar Shanto Iyengar found that news stories usually fall into one of two frames, episodic or thematic. Episodic frames are like tight close-ups, a story about one crime or one family losing their home. They force us to ask who is responsible, which always points the finger at an individual. But thematic frames, they're the wide-angle shot. They look at the trends, the systems, the bigger context, and they prompt us to ask a totally different question. What is responsible? And the consequences of this are massive. Just look. Is obesity a problem of one person's willpower, or is it about things like food deserts and predatory marketing? Is poverty just a series of bad personal choices, or is it a result of huge economic structures? The frame you use completely changes where you look for the solution. One frame is looking for a person to blame. The other is looking for a system to fix. And that really brings us to the most important takeaway from all of this. The language we use, the metaphors we choose, the frames we build, they aren't just passively describing the world as it is. They are actively creating it. They determine what we see as possible, what we even recognize as a problem, and who we think is responsible for fixing it. So the real power here isn't just in being able to spot the frames other people are using. It's in realizing that you have the power to be an architect yourself. By choosing your words, by choosing your metaphors intentionally, you can change the conversation at your job, in your community, even just at the dinner table. So now that you can see the frames all around you, what are you going to build?